You are listening to HOA Karen Patrol. This is how a warning turned into a threat. My name is Marcus. I am a school custodian in Edmonton, Alberta, and I know everyone in this town because I have been mopping their kids' hallways for 8 years. When I moved into Hidden Creek 2 years ago, I thought I was getting a quiet neighborhood where I could save up for my daughter's college fund without drama. I was wrong. The Hidden Creek HOA board runs this place like a feudal kingdom, and the board president, Angela Perez, decides which rules matter and which neighbors get targeted. I learned that the hard way when I decided to put up a fence. Angela was standing in my driveway before I even unloaded the truck. "You cannot build that fence," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "That violates setback requirements, and you did not submit plans for approval." I had submitted plans. I had the email confirmation. I had read the covenants 3 times. My fence was 6 feet tall, cedar pickets, 10 feet from the street, exactly where the survey said my property line sat. But Angela did not care about facts. She cared about control. I pulled out my phone and showed her the approval email. She barely glanced at it. "That was under the old board," she said. "We have updated interpretations. Your fence encroaches on the easement and it blocks sightlines." I looked at the street. There was no corner. There were no sightlines to block. The easement she was talking about was a utility strip that ran along the back of my lot, nowhere near where I was building. But she kept talking. "You can be mad, or you can be compliant. That is how this works." I should have known right then that this was not about rules. This was about Angela reminding everyone who was in charge. She had been election committee chair for 4 years, and people whispered that she manipulated ballots and proxies to keep her allies on the board. Nobody ran against her anymore. Nobody wanted the hassle. But I was not trying to run against her. I just wanted a fence so my dog could run in the yard without me chasing him down the street. Angela turned and walked back to her car. But before she got in, she looked over her shoulder and said, "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." Then she drove off, and I stood there holding a drill and wondering what I had just signed up for. The next morning, I got a violation notice in my mailbox. It had my address, a photo of my truck with the fence materials still in the bed, and a line that said I had 7 days to remove all prohibited construction materials or face a $50 per day fine. The photo was dated 3 days earlier. I had only bought the materials yesterday. Someone had taken an old photo, or Angela had backdated the notice. Either way, I was being set up. I called the HOA management company. The woman on the phone sounded tired. She said Angela had submitted the violation herself and that the board had voted to fast-track enforcement because of safety concerns. I asked what safety concerns. She did not have an answer. I asked to see the board meeting minutes. She said they were not available yet. I asked when they would be available. She said she would get back to me. She never did. I went to work that day and kept my head down. I mopped floors, I fixed broken desks, I unlocked classrooms for teachers who forget their keys. It is steady work, but I am still on probation. My supervisor told me 2 weeks ago that one more late arrival, and I am done. I cannot afford to lose this job. I cannot afford to pay Angela's fines. I cannot afford to let her win. But I also cannot afford to fight her if it means I am late to work or I have to take days off for hearings. That evening, I called my neighbor Turul. He had lived in Hidden Creek for 15 years and had watched Angela take over the board one election at a time. He came over with a folder full of old emails and photos. "Look at this," he said, spreading them out on my kitchen table. Angela did the same thing to the Mitchells 2 years ago. They wanted to replace their driveway. She said it violated the surface material standards. They spent $3,000 on engineers and surveys, and then she approved a variance for her friend across the street, who poured the exact same driveway a month later. A2 Rule was retired, calm, and methodical. He did not get loud. He did not get angry. He just kept records. And he had records on Angela going back years. Selective enforcement, he said. That is her weapon. She does not enforce rules. She enforces loyalty. You did not vote for her slate last election. That is why she is targeting you. I had not thought about it that way, but he was right. Last spring, the board election had 3 open seats. Angela had handpicked 3 candidates and sent out a mailer with their names and photos. I had voted for 2 of them and left 1 slot blank because I did not know the 3rd candidate. Apparently, that was enough to put me on her list. A2UE handed me a printed photo. This is from the Mitchells file. Angela used the same violation notice template, same phrasing, same vague safety language. She counts on people not reading the fine print. She counts on people assuming guilt and paying the fine to make it go away. Do not do that. Fight her, but fight her smart. I asked him how. He smiled. Record everything. Get witnesses. Make her prove every claim. And whatever you do, do not let her control the narrative. She thrives when people stay quiet. I spent that night reading the covenants again. The setback rule Angela had cited did not apply to my lot. It applied to corner lots, and I was mid-block. The easement she mentioned was real, but it was 20 feet behind my fence line. Nothing I was building came close. She had invented the violation, dressed it up in official language, and counted on me not checking. The next day, I called the city planning office. I explained the situation and asked if my fence required a permit. The clerk checked the address and said no. Fences under 2 meters in a residential zone do not need a permit in Edmonton unless they are on a corner or near a lane. I asked if the HOA could override that. She laughed. No. We do not enforce HOA rules. If they are telling you the city requires something, they are lying. I asked her to send me that in writing. She did. I printed it, put it in a folder, and added it to the pile 7 new had started for me. That afternoon, Angela showed up again. This time, she had a tow truck. I was in the garage organizing tools when I heard the diesel engine. I walked outside and saw a flatbed backed up to my driveway. A driver in a stained jacket was hooking a chain to the pallet of fence pickets I had stacked by the curb. I ran over. "What are you doing?" I said. He did not look at me. HOA called it in, he said. Unauthorized materials on common property. I looked at the curb. It was not common property. It was my driveway. The curb strip belonged to the city, but the pallet was 5 feet inside my property line. Angela was standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed. "You were warned," she said. "You can be mad, or you can be compliant." I pulled out my phone and started recording. The driver saw the camera and stopped. He unhooked the chain, walked back to his truck, and leaned against the cab. I kept recording. Angela stepped closer. "You think that camera protects you?" she said. "We have authority to remove hazards." "That pallet is a hazard." I asked her how. She did not answer. She just turned and walked back to her car. The driver followed her. They left, but the message was clear. Angela was not going to stop. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the tow truck, about Angela's face, about the $50 per day fines that were supposedly piling up. I got up at 3 in the morning and started going through the covenants again. That is when I found it. Section 12, subsection 4. Any board member with a financial interest in a vendor or contractor used by the association must disclose that interest in writing and recuse themselves from related votes. I pulled up the HOA financial records. They were public, posted on the community website. I started going through the payments, landscaping, snow removal, legal fees. And then I saw it, a line item for towing and vehicle removal services. 5 payments over the last year, all to the same company. The same company whose truck had been in my driveway that afternoon. I looked up the business registration. The owner was listed as Michael Perez, Angela's husband. I kept my voice low because my trump card needed perfect timing. I did not tell HLUI yet. I did not tell anyone. I just saved the records, printed them, and put them in my folder. The next morning, I started building the fence anyway. I dug the post holes, set the posts in concrete, and let them cure. Angela did not show up. I thought maybe she had backed off. I was wrong. 2 days later, I got another notice. This one was not about materials. It was about construction without approval, with a new twist. The notice said I had altered the grade of my lot without a grading permit and that I was creating drainage issues for neighboring properties. I had not altered the grade. I had dug post holes, 18 inches deep, 8 inches wide, filled with concrete. That is not grading. That is foundation work. But Angela did not care. The notice said I had 14 days to restore the original grade or face a lien on my property. I called the city again. The same clerk answered. I explained the new claim. She sighed. That is not a thing, she said. You do not need a grading permit for fence post holes. If the HOA is telling you that, they are making it up. She offered to send an inspector out to confirm. I said yes. The inspector came the next day. He was a guy in his 50s with a clipboard and a tape measure. He walked the property line, looked at the post holes, checked the drainage slope, and then turned to me. You are fine, he said. No grade change, no drainage impact. If the HOA is threatening you over this, that is a them problem, not a city problem. He wrote it up in a report and emailed me a copy. I added it to my folder. That weekend, Angela escalated again. She sent an email to the entire neighborhood. The subject line was safety notice. The body of the email said that a resident was conducting unpermitted construction that posed drainage and structural risks to neighboring properties. It did not name me, but everyone knew. My next-door neighbor, an older woman named Dolores, knocked on my door that evening. She looked worried. Is it true? She asked. Are you doing something dangerous? I showed her the city inspector's report. She read it, shook her head, and said, Angela is lying again. Why does nobody stop her? That was the question. Why did nobody stop her? The answer was simple. Fear. Angela controlled the board. She controlled the election process. She controlled the vendors. And she used vague safety language so neighbors assumed guilt without reading anything. People did not check the facts. They just believed the notices. But Dolores was different. She had been through this before. 3 years ago, Angela had tried to fine her for parking her car on the street overnight during a snowstorm. Dolores had fought it, won, and Angela had held a grudge ever since. Dolores did not care. She was 72, retired, and fearless. She told me to keep building and promised to show up at the next board meeting. I finished the fence that week. Posts, rails, pickets, gate. It looked great. It was exactly what I had planned. And it was completely legal. Angela sent me a final notice the day I hung the gate. The notice said I had failed to comply with previous orders and that the board had voted to impose a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $2,000. $2,000 for a fence that violated nothing. The notice included a breakdown: $50 per day for 14 days for the materials violation, another $50 per day for 7 days for the construction violation, and a $500 administrative fee for processing the lien. It was a shakedown. Plain and simple. I did not pay. I sent Angela a certified letter disputing every charge, citing the city inspector's report, the planning office's letter, and the covenant section that proved my fence was compliant. I sent copies to the HOA management company and to every board member. I got one reply. It was from Angela. It said, "Your dispute has been reviewed and denied. Payment is due within 10 days, or we will proceed with foreclosure proceedings." Foreclosure. Over a fence. I knew she could not actually foreclose that fast, but the threat was real. Liens accumulate interest. Legal fees pile up. And HOAs in Alberta have powerful collection tools. If I did not fight this, I would lose my house. Tui told me to request a hearing. Every homeowner has the right to a hearing before a lien is filed, he said. Make them justify it in front of witnesses. I filed the request that day. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, on a Tuesday evening at the community center. I spent those 2 weeks gathering everything: emails, photos, inspector reports, covenant sections, the towing company's business registration, the HOA financial records showing the payments to Angela's husband's company. I did not know if I would need all of it, but I wanted to be ready. The night before the hearing, Angela called me. Her voice was calm, almost friendly. "Marcus," she said, "I think we can resolve this without a hearing. If you agree to remove the fence and pay a reduced fine of $500, we will drop the lien." I asked why I should pay anything when I had not violated any rules. She said, "Because fighting this will cost you more than $500, and you will lose. You can be mad, or you can be compliant." I hung up. I did not sleep that night. I kept thinking about my daughter, about the college fund, about my job, about everything I stood to lose. But I also kept thinking about Dolores, about Neen Ui, about every other person Angela had steamrolled. Someone had to stop her. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmares and the justice that follows. The hearing was in the community center conference room. It was a small space with a folding table at the front and rows of plastic chairs. Angela sat at the table with 2 other board members. About 15 neighbors were in the audience. Dolores was in the front row. Thm2Uiwe was in the back, recording on his phone. Angela started the hearing by reading the charges: unauthorized construction, failure to obtain approval, grade alteration, drainage impact, refusal to comply with correction orders. She had a stack of printed photos of my fence materials, my truck, my fence, and my yard. She waved them like evidence. "This is a clear case of willful violation," she said. The homeowner was warned multiple times and chose to proceed anyway. I stood up. I introduced myself, stated my address, and said I was here to dispute every charge. I started with the setback claim. I pulled out the covenant and read the section aloud. "It applies to corner lots only. My lot is mid-block." Angela interrupted. "The board has interpreted that section to include all lots for safety reasons." I asked when that interpretation was adopted. She said it was a standing interpretation. I asked to see the meeting minutes where it was discussed. She did not have them. I moved to the grading claim. I pulled out the city inspector's report and passed copies to the board. The inspector confirmed no grade change and no drainage impact, I said. Angela barely looked at it. "The city does not enforce HOA rules," she said. "We have our own standards." I asked her to show me the HOA grading standard. She could not. Then I brought up the towing company. I pulled out the business registration and the HOA financial records. I handed them to the board. "Your husband owns the towing company the HOA has paid over $6,000 to in the last year," I said, looking directly at Angela. "You did not disclose that conflict of interest. You voted on contracts with your own family business. That is a violation of the covenants, and it makes every fine you have issued suspect." The room went silent. Angela's face went red. "That has nothing to do with your fence," she said. I said, "It has everything to do with selective enforcement. You are using HOA rules to generate business for your husband's company. You target people who do not vote for you, fabricate violations, and then threaten to tow their property using a company you profit from." One of the other board members, a man named Gerald, looked at the financial records. "Angela, is this true?" he said. Angela did not answer. She just shuffled her papers and said, "We need to move on." But I was not done. I pulled out my phone and played the video I had recorded of the tow truck in my driveway. You can hear Angela in the video saying, "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." I paused it. "That is not enforcement," I said. "That is extortion." Dolores stood up. "I want to speak," she said. Angela tried to shut her down, but Gerald said, "Let her talk." Dolores walked to the front. "Angela tried this same thing with me 3 years ago," she said. "Fake violations, threats, fines. She uses fear to control people. And nobody stops her because she controls the election process. I am tired of it. We all are." 2 more neighbors stood up and started talking. One had been fined for a mailbox that was the wrong color. Another had been fined for parking a work van in his own driveway. Both had paid rather than fight. Both were angry that Angela had lied to them the same way she had lied to me. Angela tried to regain control. She banged a gavel on the table and said, "This hearing is about Marcus's fence, not about board conduct." Gerald cut her off. "Actually, Angela, I think we need to talk about board conduct. If what Marcus is saying is true, we have a serious problem." Angela stood up and gathered her papers. "I am not going to sit here and be accused of things I did not do," she said. "This hearing is over." She walked out. The other 2 board members stayed. Gerald looked at me. "Can you send me everything you just showed us?" he said. I said yes. The hearing ended without a vote. Technically, that meant the lien was still pending. But Angela had lost control of the room, and everyone knew it. The next day, I got a call from the HOA management company. The woman on the phone sounded different this time. Less tired, more direct. "We have received several complaints about the board president's conduct," she said. "We are opening an internal review. In the meantime, all enforcement actions against your property are suspended pending that review." I asked how long the review would take. She said 2 to 3 weeks. I said that was fine. "You called me that afternoon. I just got off the phone with Gerald," he said. "He is filing a formal complaint with the management company about Angela's conflict of interest. 2 other board members are doing the same. Angela is done." I wanted to believe that, but I had learned not to trust anything until it was finished. A week later, I got a notice in the mail. It was not from Angela. It was from the City of Edmonton, Code Enforcement Division. Someone had filed a complaint claiming my fence violated city setback rules. The complaint was anonymous, but I knew who had filed it. Angela was trying to use the city to do what the HOA could not. The city sent an inspector. It was the same guy who had come before. He measured everything again, checked his records, and then laughed. "Whoever filed this complaint does not know what they are talking about," he said. "Your fence is fine." He closed the case that day. But Angela did not stop. 2 days later, I came home from work and found a stop work order taped to my fence. It was printed on HOA letterhead and said that all construction must cease immediately pending a board review. The order was not signed. It was not dated. It was just a piece of paper Angela had printed and taped to my fence to intimidate me. I took a photo of it and sent it to Gerald and to the management company. "This is harassment," I wrote. "Please make it stop." Gerald replied within an hour. "I am calling an emergency board meeting," he wrote. "Angela has gone too far." The emergency meeting was held 3 days later. I was not invited, but Su Sui was there as a homeowner observer. He recorded the whole thing and sent me the audio file that night. In the recording, Gerald starts by reading the complaints. 3 homeowners have filed formal complaints about selective enforcement. 2 board members have filed conflict of interest complaints. And the management company has recommended removing Angela from her position as board president pending a full investigation. Angela tries to defend herself. She says the complaints are politically motivated. She says I am a troublemaker who has turned the neighborhood against her. She says the towing company payments were legitimate vendor fees and that her husband's business was the lowest bidder. But then someone asks her about the fake stop work order. Angela hesitates. "That was not fake," she says. "That was a preliminary notice pending board action." Gerald cuts her off. "You issued a stop work order without a board vote. You taped it to a homeowner's property in the middle of the night. That is not enforcement. That is harassment." The vote is unanimous. Angela is removed as board president effective immediately. Gerald is appointed interim president. And all enforcement actions against my property are permanently dropped. Macho called me that night. "It is over," he said. "You won." But I was not sure it was over. Angela had been humiliated. She had lost her position. She had been exposed. People like that do not just walk away. 2 weeks later, I found out I was right. The HOA management company contacted me and said they were conducting a financial audit. During the audit, they discovered that over $12,000 in HOA funds were missing. The money had been transferred out in small increments over the last year, all coded as administrative expenses or emergency repairs. None of the expenses had receipts. None of the repairs had been done. And all of the transfers had been authorized by Angela. The management company filed a report with the police. Angela was investigated. She claimed the money had been used for legitimate HOA purposes and that the receipts had been lost. But the city inspector confirmed that none of the emergency repairs Angela had claimed ever happened. The landscaping company she had paid confirmed they had never done the work she had invoiced. And the towing company, her husband's company, admitted that several of the towing charges had been for jobs that were never completed. Angela was using fake fence violations to cover missing HOA money, and the ledger proved it. The police did not charge her right away. White-collar cases take time. But the HOA board voted to terminate her membership and to file a civil lawsuit to recover the missing funds. Angela sold her house 3 months later and moved out of Hidden Creek. I never saw her again. The new board, led by Gerald, passed a resolution prohibiting any board member from doing business with the HOA and requiring full financial transparency. They also passed a rule that any homeowner facing enforcement action has the right to request a third-party review before fines are imposed. Dolores called it the Marcus Rule. I called it common sense. But the real payoff came a month after Angela left. I was at work, mopping the gym after a basketball game, when I got a call from the tow truck driver who had shown up at my house that day. He said he wanted to apologize. I did not know the whole story, he said. Angela told me you were a problem tenant and that the HOA had authority to remove your stuff. I should have asked more questions. When I found out she was using me to shake people down, I stopped taking her calls. I told him I appreciated the call. He said, "For what it is worth, you were not the only one. She tried to get me to tow cars, trailers, even a guy's boat one time. All of it was bogus. I should have said no sooner." I asked him why he was telling me this now. He said because I do not want to be that guy anymore. I am done working with HOAs. Too much shady stuff. I hung up and went back to mopping. The gym was empty. The lights were bright. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. A few weeks later, I was walking my dog past the community center when I saw a new family moving into Angela's old house. They had 2 kids and a golden retriever. The wife waved at me. I waved back. The husband was unloading boxes from a truck. I walked over and introduced myself. "Welcome to Hidden Creek," I said. "If you ever need anything, let me know." He smiled. "Thanks," he said. "We heard this is a pretty quiet neighborhood." I laughed. "It is now," I said. That evening, Sami came over with a 6-pack. We sat on my back deck, looking at the fence I had built. "It is a good fence," he said. "You did good work." I said, "I just wanted to keep my dog in the yard." He said, "You did more than that. You stood up to a bully. That matters." We sat there for a while, not talking, just watching the sun go down. My daughter called. She was at college, halfway through her first semester. She asked how things were going. I told her everything was fine. She asked about the fence. I said it was finished. She said, "Good. I am proud of you, Dad." I hung up and looked at Ennio Yarui. He raised his beer. "To fences," he said. I raised mine. "To fences." The HOA held its annual meeting a month later. The turnout was the highest it had been in years. Gerald presented the new financial transparency rules and the enforcement review process. Dolores stood up and gave a speech about accountability. Several people clapped. Someone nominated Tusui for a board seat. He declined, but he said he would stay involved as a homeowner observer. The room voted unanimously to approve the new rules. At the end of the meeting, Gerald stood up and said, "I want to acknowledge Marcus. He could have paid the fines and moved on. He could have torn down his fence and given up. But he did not. He fought back, and because he did, this board is better. This neighborhood is better. Thank you." People clapped. I did not stand up. I just nodded. I did not need a speech. I just needed my fence, my job, and my daughter's college fund. And I had all three. A few months later, I got a letter from the city. It was from the planning office. The letter said that a complaint had been filed against the HOA for interfering with permitted work and for making false claims to city inspectors. The city had investigated and found that the HOA had repeatedly misrepresented city regulations to homeowners. The city warned the HOA to stop interfering with permitted work, and the board publicly reversed Karen policy to avoid municipal trouble. The letter was copied to the HOA board, the management company, and every homeowner in Hidden Creek. Angela's name was not mentioned, but everyone knew. I framed the letter and hung it in my garage, right next to my tool bench. The final piece of the story came 6 months later. I was at a parent-teacher conference at the school when I ran into a woman I recognized from the HOA meeting. She was a teacher, and her son was in my daughter's class. She pulled me aside and said, "I just want to thank you. After what you did, I finally had the courage to challenge a parking fine the HOA gave me. I showed them the photos and the timestamps just like you did. They dropped it. You showed us we did not have to be afraid." I did not know what to say. I just said, "Good. I am glad it worked out." She smiled and walked away, and I realized that was the real win. Not the fence, not the money, not even stopping Angela. The real win was showing people that bullies only have power if you let them. I walked out of the school that night and saw my fence from the street. It looked solid. It looked permanent. It looked like it belonged. And for the first time since I moved to Hidden Creek, I felt like I belonged too. My daughter graduated 2 years later. I used the college fund I had saved. Every dollar. She got her degree. She got a job. And she called me on her first day and said, "Thanks for not giving up, Dad." I told her I loved her. I told her I was proud of her. And I told her that sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do, but you do it anyway. She said, "I know. You taught me that." I hung up and sat on my back deck. The fence was still there. The dog was still there. And I was still there. Angela was gone. The missing money was being recovered. The HOA was running clean. And Hidden Creek was finally the quiet neighborhood I had hoped for. Ensui came over that evening. We sat on the deck and drank beer and talked about nothing in particular. At one point, he looked at the fence and said, "You ever think about what would have happened if you had just paid the fine?" I said, "Yeah, I think about it all the time." He said, "What do you think would have happened?" I said, "I think Angela would still be here. I think she would still be running the board. And I think she would still be stealing from the HOA and targeting anyone who did not fall in line." He nodded. "So you saved the neighborhood," he said. I laughed. "I just built a fence," I said. He said, "No. You did more than that. You showed people what integrity looks like. That matters more than any fence." We sat there for a while longer, watching the sun go down. The sky was orange and pink. The air was cool, and everything was quiet. I thought about Angela. I thought about the hearing. I thought about the moment I pulled out the financial records and watched her face go red. I thought about the city inspector confirming what the HOA cannot enforce. I thought about Karen trying to shame me and the neighbor fact-checking her instantly. I thought about Karen's bluff getting read out loud and the room reacting. And I thought about how the HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints piled up. And I thought about my daughter, and my job, and my fence, and how sometimes the hardest fights are the ones worth fighting. Ensil UA stood up to leave. Before he walked down the steps, he turned and said, "You did good, Marcus. You did real good." I said, "Thanks." He said, "Anytime you need anything, you let me know." I said, "Same to you." He walked home. I stayed on the deck for another hour, just sitting, just breathing, just being. The dog came out and lay down beside me. I scratched his ears, he sighed, and I thought, this is it. This is what I was fighting for. Not the fence, not the money. Just this. Just peace. The stars came out. The neighborhood was quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had won something that mattered. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.